Hello, and welcome to today's Policy Connection, Why Waste Matters, the Environmental, Economic, and Community Case for Action. I'm John Kenya, Senior Director of Policy and Strategic Initiatives at Sustainable Pittsburgh. As a reminder, this virtual event will be recorded, and these materials will be shared after today's program. If you have any questions arise, please submit any questions via the chat box, and we'll answer any of your questions after the presentations. You can also raise your hand. Written questions will be answered first, followed by the raised hand. Feel free to enter your name and organization into the chat so that everyone knows who's in attendance. As always, we strive to create a welcoming environment for all participants and encourage everyone to engage with respect and courtesy. Constructive discussions and diverse perspectives are valued, and we ask that all interactions remain professional and considerate. As a courtesy, we do ask that you remain muted during presentations. By participating in this event, you are helping to foster a positive experience where everyone can learn and contribute meaningfully. At Sustainable Pittsburgh, our mission is to empower decision-making that builds a fundamentally equitable, resilient, healthy, and prosperous region. We are doing that through connecting our stakeholders and networks we host, such as the Policy Connection series that you're at today, to share knowledge of sustainability through resources and experiences to help make a region where all people may succeed. Sustainable Pittsburgh is committed to building the knowledge, perspective, and ability needed to create a better tomorrow for our region. We're optimistic, having worked with nearly 1,000 businesses, communities, and organizations to take action using their customized frameworks to track progress and simultaneously advance social equity, environmental stewardship, and prosperity. The strategic networks we host leverage the collective expertise and diverse perspectives within our region to ensure our communities can meet our challenges today and thrive into the future. That is why we've invited you here today as part of our Policy Connection, to learn together so that we can act together. And together is how we co-create a fundamentally equitable, resilient, healthy, and prosperous region. We would like to thank our silver sponsors, Duquesne Light, Levin Furniture, and Pitt, Ohio, for their support of Sustainable Pittsburgh to make programs like this possible. And we'd also like to extend our gratitude to our bronze and platinum sponsors for their ongoing support. For our agenda today, we'll begin with a brief introduction to the topic and Sustainable Pittsburgh's Bite Pittsburgh initiative, then move into our speaker presentations. We will then transition to a brief question and answer session, and in a bit of a departure from our typical format, we will follow that up with interactive breakout sessions tailored by sector. First, we'll hear from Darby Hoover, Senior Resource Specialist for Nature and Environmental Health at the Natural Resources Defense Council. Darby will help frame the hidden costs of waste from a national perspective, including the economic, operational, environmental, and community impacts that begin before materials reach the point of disposal. Second, we'll hear from Laura Blood, Environmental Education Manager at the Pennsylvania Resources Council. Laura will help translate the issue into practical regional action by discussing smarter approaches to waste reduction, including prevention-first strategies, recovery and reuse opportunities, composting and recycling as one tool within a larger framework. Following the speaker presentations, we'll move into facilitated breakout discussions focused on food and beverage hospitality, retail, offices and workplaces and communities, institutions, and the public sector. As a reminder, please use the chat box for any questions you may have for our panelists. We will answer them later in the program. Next, I am glad to welcome my colleague, Rebecca Bykowski, Sustainable Pittsburgh's Director of Programs. She'll give a bit of background on today's topic and our Bite Pittsburgh initiative. Welcome, Rebecca.
Thanks, John. Hi, everyone. I'm Rebecca Bykowski, Director of Programs at Sustainable Pittsburgh. I'm going to spend just a few minutes setting the stage and connecting today's conversation to Bite Pittsburgh. One of the reasons this topic matters so much is that waste is often treated as something that begins when something gets thrown away. In reality, the costs and impacts of waste start much earlier, when we decide what we want to purchase, how much to order, how materials are packaged, whether something can be reused or recovered, and only then how it is recycled, composted, or disposed of. That upstream perspective is really important for Sustainable Pittsburgh because it gives organizations more points of influence. It moves the conversation from what do we do with this waste to how can we prevent some of it, recover more value, and make better decisions from the beginning. That upstream action-oriented lens is also why BITE Pittsburgh is such a natural fit for this webinar. BITE stands for Bridges Together for Everyone, and it's Sustainable Pittsburgh's regional initiative to bring businesses, communities, and consumers together through local action. The idea is simple: help locally rooted businesses become more visible, connect them with practical resources and educational opportunities, and support them as they take meaningful sustainability actions. BITE is not a certification or designation program. We think of it as an accessible on-ramp. Businesses can participate regardless of where they are in their sustainability journey, and over time, BITE creates pathways toward deeper engagement through our Sustainable Pittsburgh shops, restaurants, and workplaces programs. Within BITE, we focus on 5 action areas: energy, water, waste, sourcing, and people. Today's webinar sits most directly in the waste action area, but one of the things I hope we can take from this conversation is that waste rarely sits in one lane. Purchasing decisions affect waste. Packaging decisions affect waste. Inventory and storage affect waste, especially for food and beverage businesses. Equipment, refrigeration, dishwashing, and hot water use can connect waste to energy and water costs. And the way organizations communicate expectations, train staff, and engage customers connects waste reduction to people and community outcomes. For many organizations, waste is also a very visible place to begin. It can be easier to see than other sustainability issues, and it can often point to practical solutions to save money, improve operations, and create broader environmental and community benefit. BITE also creates a way for BITE also creates a way to connect business action with community activation. This summer, we are doing that through Summer of Local, which encourages residents and visitors to discover, support, and celebrate local businesses across southwestern Pennsylvania. Customers can find participating BITE businesses via the online business directory, visit them, scan a QR code, and enter to win weekly gift card drawings. That gives businesses added visibility and gives residents a simple reason to explore local places across the region. At the same time, the business side of BITE continues to connect participants to educational events, technical resources, and actions they can take in areas like waste reduction. That's the model we're building: visibility, resources, and action reinforcing one another. So before I move on, I also want to make a quick invitation. If you work with or know a business that seems like a good fit for BITE Pittsburgh, we would love for you to send them our way. BITE is free to participate in and is designed for locally rooted businesses across southwestern Pennsylvania, including restaurants, retailers, makers, food and beverage producers, service providers, and other businesses that are interested in strengthening their communities and taking meaningful steps towards sustainability. Participating businesses receive a free listing in the BITE business directory, visibility through campaign promotions and events, and access to resources and educational opportunities like today's webinar. For businesses that want to go further, BITE can also serve as an accessible on-ramp to Sustainable Pittsburgh's designation programs. You can learn more or submit a business at bitepgh.com. And before I move into our breakout rooms, I also want to flag, our speaker presentations, then our breakout rooms. I also want to flag another upcoming BITE Pittsburgh event. On Monday, August 24th, we'll host BITE Pittsburgh From Savings to Sustainability at Spirit in Lawrenceville. That event will focus on practical ways for businesses and organizations to reduce utility costs, improve water and energy efficiency, and connect with funding, financing, rebates, and technical assistance. Attendees will hear about Duquesne Light's commercial concierge program and other resources that can help make upgrades and operational improvements more accessible. If that sounds relevant for your business or organization, please scan the QR code to register. And as we move into the rest of the webinar, I invite you to listen with your own organization in mind. Where does waste really begin for you? Is it purchasing, inventory, packaging, an event plan, staff habits, customer expectations? Zarbi will help us look at the hidden costs of waste from a broader systems perspective, and Laura will help translate that into smarter regional approaches and practical action. Then we'll move into the breakout discussions designed around different operating contexts: the food and beverage, hospitality, retail offices and workplaces, and communities, institutions, and the public sector. The goal is not for everyone to leave with the same answer. The goal is for each person to leave with a clear step, a resource to explore, or a partnership to pursue. And with that, I'm excited to turn it back over to John to introduce our speakers.
Thank you, Rebecca. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Darby Hoover. Darby Hoover is a food waste and sustainability expert at the Natural Resources Defense Council, NRDC, where she developed strategies to improve the efficiency of the food system through food waste prevention, surplus food recovery, and recycling. Her expertise includes composting, anaerobic digestion, plastics, recycling, and sustainable packaging. She is based in San Francisco. Welcome, Darby.
Thank you, John, and thank you, Rebecca, and thanks for inviting me to be here today. We're going to talk about food waste today, and we could start those slides anytime. Food is the most prevalent material in the municipal solid waste stream. So if we're going to talk about reducing waste, food is an important part of the conversation. Next slide. About a third of all of the food in the U.S. ends up going to waste, and that is worth $382 billion per year. And meanwhile, 1 in 7 Americans are food insecure. So we can see that food waste has environmental, economic, and social costs. Next slide. In the U.S., the average family of 4 spends almost $3,000 per year on food they never eat. Next slide. When we waste food, we waste all the water, energy, labor, agricultural chemicals, and other resources that go into growing, storing, and transporting food. Most wasted food ends up in landfills where it generates methane, a greenhouse gas that is up to 86 times more powerful than CO2. And indeed, wasted food is responsible for at least 4% of all U.S. greenhouse gas emissions. Food waste happens across the supply chain. You can see that the place that food waste takes place the most is in the residential sector, but the other sectors contribute as well. And in the residential sector, often that waste comes from decisions that have been made farther up the chain. So things like how we label date labels on our food can have an impact on how much food is wasted at the residential level. Next slide. Food waste ends up, a little bit of it is donated. Some goes to livestock feed, and 85% goes to what ReFed refers to as waste destinations. Not all waste destinations are created equal here. Composting provides the benefit of returning nutrients to the soil, which landfilling and sewering and dumping and incineration do not. But it's important to note that compost still represents a failure for food that could have been eaten that ends up in that stream. Next. Landfills are the 3rd largest source of methane in the U.S. When you put food in a landfill, it rots, releasing methane. And food, again, is the most prevalent material in landfills by weight and is responsible for 58% of all fugitive landfill methane emissions. Next slide. Incinerators aren't any better. Approximately 4.4 million Americans live within a 3-mile radius of an incinerator and are exposed to pollution from those incinerators. 80% of incinerators are located in or near low-income communities and communities of color. And incinerators are also the most expensive way to generate energy and to handle waste, while also creating significant economic burdens for host cities. Next slide. Food isn't trash. Next. Food is meant to be eaten. Next. That's why the EPA put together this wasted food scale, which tells how to reduce the environmental impacts of wasted food. In addition to reducing environmental impacts, focusing farther left on the scale tends to bring greater climate, economic, and social benefits as well. So the first thing we want to do is prevent waste where we can. And again, this applies to food, but a lot of these lessons can be taken more broadly across the municipal waste stream. Prevent where you can. That's the best way to reduce the impacts associated with waste. Donate or upcycle food. Use food to feed animals or leave unharvested to feed crops. Compost or anaerobically digest in order to return nutrients to the soil. And then the other options have to do with anaerobic digestion or landfilling or incineration that don't return nutrients to the soil. NRDC works across all levels of government to ensure that food is valued for the resource it is. Federally, we work in partnership with the Zero Food Waste Coalition to advance policies to reduce nationwide food waste. At the state level, we're working on passing bills to keep food out of landfills and incinerators that also boost surplus food donation and composting. And locally, we lead a network called Food Matters, which is cities and counties advancing food waste solutions like food rescue, consumer education, and composting access. Next. With the Zero Food Waste Coalition, we work together with the organizations whose logos are at the bottom of the slide to release policy reports, to help pass federal bills, and share updates and opportunities for engagement with partners and stakeholders around the country. So currently, Zero Food Waste Coalition is comprised of 250 plus member organizations with operations in all 50 states, and it encompasses local governments, industry, nonprofits, and academic organizations. Our perspective is that the most heard voices on food waste tend to be well-funded organizations, but critical expertise also comes from local grassroots organizations, nonprofits, governments, and community leaders. And this is a key reason why we helped launch the Zero Food Waste Coalition, so that we could amplify this local expertise and incorporate it into our advocacy. One of the resources that the Zero Food Waste Coalition created to help accelerate progress at the state level is this state policy toolkit. The goal here is to empower officials and advocates from across the country to learn from one another's successes and amplify their own leadership and impact. The toolkit contains a range of tried and tested policy opportunities that can be enacted at the state level, as well as model legislation that states can use to prevent food waste, rescue surplus food, and recycle food scraps, and which can be picked up by legislators and change makers with minimal alterations. Food waste diversion policies, otherwise known as organic waste bans, and similar policies. These are policies that keep food out of landfills and incinerators like SB 1383 in California. We're focusing right now at the state level on the potential to pass or lay the groundwork to pass these types of policies. And this work includes coalition building, circulating our model policies, and working with stakeholders to establish supporting policy language and infrastructure. Some of the benefits of food waste diversion policies, again, food waste, single largest component in U.S. landfills, and many are filling up. Decreasing waste, Vermont saw a 54% diversion in landfill waste within 3 years of passing its organic waste ban. Reducing methane emissions, in 2020, decomposing food in landfills was responsible for the equivalent to the annual greenhouse gas emissions from 15 coal-fired power plants. Green job creation. In Massachusetts, the organic waste ban led to a 150% increase in total new jobs in the organic waste industry. Increasing food rescue. In New York in 2022, which was 1 year after the food donation and food scraps recycling law came into effect, food donation increased by 60%. And finally, more local compost collection. Since January 2022, 97% of California communities with requirements instituted residential organic waste collection. Next slide. Thank you. Why do we work in cities as well as at the federal and state level? Well, in the U.S., cities are the ones primarily responsible for funding and setting up waste management infrastructure. So working on food waste can mean that cities manage less waste overall. They can potentially have more food relief to help them fill meal gaps, and they can also get closer to reaching their climate and sustainability goals. Cities are the entities that will be liable for most of the logistics and finances of implementing state-level organic waste bans. Of course, organizations are also going to be responsible for implementing different policies and procedures as well if the state-level policies are in place. So it's important for organizations to follow some of these same protocols. Our goals in working with cities include on-the-ground change, but also we want to inspire cities to influence one another and to support cities to be leaders, including at the state and national levels. A big part of our Food Matters Cities project is the templatized tools that we've created for cities and counties to use. And the tools include guides that detail how we executed food waste reduction strategies in cities and organizations, and offer templates that can easily be adapted to a particular city's needs. This is just a sampling of our tools on screen. And I want to focus in on two tools in particular. The first is our policy and program toolkit. This toolkit includes 13 strategies, what a city can do to reduce food waste. For each strategy, we offer one or more recommended actions, how a city can accomplish the strategy, along with city examples and a list of additional resources. And again, I'm saying city here, but a lot of these resources and suggestions are helpful at the organizational level, at the county level, and even at the state level. The next tool I want to highlight is our municipal model policies, which are off-the-shelf versions of template language that provide clean, streamlined legal language that can be easily enacted by a municipality. We have versions of these models with commentaries that offer additional context and background, explain the benefits of key provisions and alternative approaches, and provide links to examples. The commentaries can help guide a municipality in tailoring the models to its specific circumstances. And typically, these model policies are accompanied by a background memo, a slide presentation, and a model resolution. And we also have some room for education on individual action. NRDC helped put together a site called SaveTheFood.com, which offers tips on how to plan, use, and store food. So individuals can take action as well. Individuals and organizations and cities and states all have a part to play in reducing food waste. The first thing to do is to always ask, how can we prevent food from going to waste in the first place? That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Darby. Next, I'm excited to introduce Laura Blood. Laura Blood is an environmental education and water resources professional at the Pennsylvania Resources Council. Her experience includes drinking and wastewater operations, compliance, source water protection, environmental consulting, and environmental education. She has worked with PADEP's Safe Drinking Water Department, municipal authorities, and environmental education programs. Welcome, Laura.
Thank you. Thank you, John. Thank you so much, Darby. Yeah, you set me up quite well. Yeah, so I'm going to just give you a little bit broader perspective, definitely also including food waste, but I'll tell you who Pennsylvania Resources Council is, what we do, how our stuff, how the materials we use impacts people, a little introduction to what we call the waste hierarchy, and then some more of those real world examples of reduction, reducing, and recycling, and talk about some obstacles and potential solutions, and then hopefully provide some local resources. So Pennsylvania Resources Council, we're a statewide nonprofit. We were established in 1939. We have two offices, one in the west, which is where I am in Pittsburgh, and another just outside of Philadelphia in the east. And our mission is to steward resources to prevent waste and conserve the environment. So we are an environmental nonprofit. But next. And so we do a number of different things. I won't get into any of these in any detail, but just to give you a general overview, we do collection events, so hard to recycle and household hazardous waste, household chemical materials. I am in the education and outreach department, so we do student education, adult education, both virtual and in person. Also, we have a glass recycling program, which I'll talk about a little bit in the presentation. We have watershed protection initiatives, especially out in our Eastern office, where we do a lot of at-home watershed evaluations and homeowner stormwater evaluations. And then we have zero waste services. If you've ever seen our landfill recycling and compost bins at local Pittsburgh events, we are a contracted service, and we'll tell you a little bit about that in the presentation as well. And then we also have some policy and advocacy work. So in Pennsylvania, the main rule that dictates recycling is Act 101. So we have some interesting information about trying to update Act 101, and I'll give you some more perspective on that as we go along. So the impacts to our stuff kind of depend on the life cycle of materials. So on the left there, you can see a life cycle assessment. It takes you through how we create stuff. So first, stuff is either mined or it's grown. So we have to extract it. So resource extraction, then we have transportation, production, manufacturing, then packaging, use, maintenance, and repair, and then what happens to it. It can get recycled, incinerated, or landfill. And when you think about this process and you think about what stage of that process uses the most resources, it's typically between resource extraction and manufacturing. And then I also wanted to bring in some impacts, some people impacts. So there's something called the social determinants of public health. And if you've been to the doctor's office recently and had to fill out some survey questions about, do you feel safe at home? Do you have enough food? Do you have a place to live? That's based on this data. So 30 to 50% of our health outcomes are related to social determinants of public health. So how are those two things related? And you should be able to click here again. And here's some different examples of how those two things relate to each other. So in material extraction, that is connected to worker health, community and air and water quality. And Darby talked a lot about this. Also, indigenous land rights, manufacturing, you have pollution exposure for nearby low-income or minority communities, also occupational health, and distribution and transport. So we have all the diesel pollution, both on waterways and highways and railways. And then use, how we use our things. So we have access to safe, durable goods is influenced by income, energy dictated by how we use an item. Also, things like microplastics and PFAS kind of come into account when we talk about plastics and how we dispose of them. Landfills and incinerators is something that Darby touched on, are disproportionately cited in marginalized communities. There's a report cited here, which you'll get access to, about more information about less pollution and creating jobs. So how the recycling economy can create jobs. So I just wanted to give you a little bit perspective of how all the life cycle stages of life impact people and impact our health. So next slide. So in addition, because of that, because resource extraction and manufacturing are the drivers, are the things that impact the environment, they've developed something called the zero waste hierarchy, and you should be able to click one more there. And you'll get some stats here from the United Nations. Resource extraction causes 90% of biodiversity loss and water stress and 50% of global greenhouse emissions. For that reason, the zero waste hierarchy tells us what's going to give us the most bang for our buck in terms of how we use materials. So we want to rethink and redesign first. For instance, do I really need that? That's the question we need to ask first. And then reduce. So reduce how much materials we use, reuse the materials and or repair them that we have. And then we get down to recycling and composting, material recovery, residuals management, and then in the unacceptable category is incineration and waste to energy. So we really want to focus in those top 3 categories if we can, and that should kind of guide our decisions when it comes to things like purchasing and using materials. Next slide. So an example of reduce, I wanted to use food waste. Food waste is something that PRC is very involved with. We're very involved with Zero Waste Food Coalition and ReFed. This is all data from ReFed that Darby also brought up. This is a very local perspective. So in Pennsylvania, we waste 3.56 billion pounds of food waste in 2024. And because that's a hard number to conceptualize, you can think about a semi-truck. So a semi-truck that delivered every 5 minutes, how long would it take to deliver 3.56 billion pounds? It would take about 6 months. It would take about 154.5 days, which is insane, especially considering that we have a large population that is food insecure in Pennsylvania, and that has increased over the past few years. Like Darby said, residential is our largest sector of food waste. We have some very amazing local networks. So we have 412 Food Rescue, which does a lot with food recovery efforts. PRC ourselves. So I mentioned our zero waste network that we go out to different events. So we have networked with places like 412 Food Rescue, AgriCycle, a lot of other places where we can try to redistribute goods and materials before they end up in the landfill or an incinerator. In addition, NRDC created in 2021, they created a food policy gap analysis for Pennsylvania. And the next year, the Pennsylvania created a food policy council. So in Pennsylvania, we are starting to try to make statewide efforts to reduce food waste and have a more cohesive policy. In addition, locally, we have the Pittsburgh Food Policy Council, which is also there too. I also like bringing up too this old poster from World War II to kind of bring to light that this isn't the first time that we have looked at food waste as an issue, especially as a nation. And I think it's really really nice to know that when we're all working together for the same goal, that we can do some pretty amazing things. So an example of reuse and repair locally. So in Pittsburgh, we have a repair cafe. A repair cafe, if you're not familiar, a group of volunteers that gets together in a location and helps people to fix things. And our repair cafe in Pittsburgh has focused on small appliances, electronics, small furniture, and textiles. So you can go on the first Saturday of every month to Construction Junction in Pittsburgh and bring your item and get a volunteer who will help you figure out how to reuse it or how to repair it, excuse me. Awesome. Also, our local libraries have a library of things that offer things for you to check out for free, things like tools or food preservation kits or all kinds of toys, things like that. So that's another way that we can reuse items and keep them in circularity. The Center for Creative Reuse is a center in Pittsburgh, which takes usually craft supplies for donations and then sells them at a very reduced price so that you can also find items and reuse them there. So these are nonprofits. There's also examples of for-profit businesses. So one example is Knotsland, which creates amazing bow ties from reused fabrics and materials in Homewood, Pennsylvania. So that's another great example of how a business can kind of get involved in some of these things. There's also maker spaces. A few of those are listed there, which often create things with reused materials and have very creative ways of putting things together. So go ahead, next slide. So now we're going down our little waste hierarchy and gotten to recycling. I wanted to tell you about a very local example of a regional partnership. PRC, so Pittsburgh was a glass city even before it was a steel city in the late 1800s, early 1900s. So a lot of the infrastructure is very local already. And a bottle of glass that you recycle today can be put back on shelves in 30 days. We have a glass recycling collaborative of Southwestern PA, which consists of a group of municipalities who have decided to host blue bins. And then Michael Brothers hauls them to Cap Glass, who recycles that glass into more glass bottles. And the reason why this is important is because glass specifically, it has a higher recycling rate when you separate it from other things. So a 70 to 90% recycling rate when you put it in a blue bin compared to when you put it in your recycling bin with other items like plastics and metals. So next slide. So I wanted to go over some challenges and solutions. You can go ahead and click one more time, I think. Some of the challenges are contamination. a lack of standardization, and recycling is often more expensive than landfill disposal. That has to do with the 1988 Act 101, which has a tipping fee. That fee has not increased in a while, so there's some funding issues along with that. So some solutions, Darby talked about these a little bit. In certain places, there is things like extended producer responsibility. So that's making the manufacturer responsible for the disposal of the good that they create. So there are states, you can look at some maps where the recycling rates are much higher in the states that have extended producer responsibility laws. States like Colorado, California, Pennsylvania does have two that have to do with smoke detectors and CDRA, which are different electronics. Also, mapping and building resource networks. So the map that you see on screen is from the EPA. The EPA, we have a goal in the United States to increase our recycling rate to 50%. Currently in Pennsylvania, it's about 30%. So what they're trying to do with this map is to map out the recycling infrastructure and opportunities. So where is there a material being produced that could be used by another business or manufacturer? So that map is something that they're trying to do to achieve that goal. Also expanding and upscaling composting locally. PRC has worked with the city of Pittsburgh in order to develop a composting pilot program where we offered residents several different types of composting services to figure out which ones the residents liked more, which ones are going to achieve the goals of the city. And that's still in progress. There's some more pilot work going on at the city level. Also, corporate sustainability initiatives can really help with this. And like I mentioned, updating Act 101. There is the reports down there. So the DEP did a waste characterization study, which shows you how much material ends up in the landfill. For instance, it supports the 40% of what ends up in a Pennsylvania landfill is organics, and those organics do include food waste and textile waste. And then there is the 1988 Act 101 recommendations that we put together on our website there. So if you want to click one more time. I also wanted to give a shout out to our zero waste team and let you know how this kind of works locally. So we have worked with the Pittsburgh Marathon over a number of years, and they're a very dedicated staff, has tried to divert as much as they can from marathon. So think when people are throwing their cups and banana peels and things like that, and working with them and trying to achieve their goals, we have been able to divert 94% of the waste from the landfill at that event every year, and we're very proud of that. So I wanted to give a shout out to that. Next slide. I wanted to provide some resources. These are all links you will have. So the recycling resources in Southwest Pennsylvania are just all those questions of, I have this weird thing, where do I recycle this? We have a lot of networks built up of resources for that. Also, zero waste event planning. So PRC has gotten some funding to put on a few workshops for event planners. And we have a series of resources for that. I'm going to put one of them in the chat that just gives, especially event planners or anybody having to do with a food business, ideas for where you can thrift for reusables, where you can buy compostables if you're looking for BPI certified compostables. Also, who's a zero waste friendly caterer. There is some links also to Sustainable Pittsburgh's restaurant directory, event rental services, waste hauling, reuse and donations, those type of things. I also wanted to get you in touch with our local Allegheny County Climate Action Plan. Make sure you look at that. There is a component of waste on there as well. And yeah, just give you some other information about our Pennsylvania Zero Waste Caucus and how to find your representative, because that makes a big difference in terms of policy and policy decisions. Yeah, and thank you so much. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions or put any questions in the chat.
Thank you, Laura, and thank you again, Darby, as well, for helping frame both the broader impacts of waste and the practical strategies organizations can use to reduce waste, recover value, and strengthen community outcomes. Panelists, if you don't mind, please turning your cameras back on and joining me on screen, and we will begin the Q&A portion of today's program. Once again, if you have any questions for Sustainable Pittsburgh or any of our speakers today, please put your questions in the chat. I'll start us off with a question for both speakers. So what is one misconception that organizations often have about waste reduction, especially when they assume the conversation is only about recycling?
I can start. From the perspective of food waste, a misconception that organizations have is that they don't have any food waste, and therefore everything that they need to do is focused on food waste recycling because it'll just be the banana peels and not the banana. But if you go and look in the kitchens and you can see things that are actually occurring, you find out that in every aspect of purchasing, storing, preparing food, there are opportunities to waste less food that come up once you do a audit of your kitchen operations. So I think the opportunities for prevention are often overlooked by different organizations.
Thank you.
And I'll kind of second that in a broader perspective. So in addition to just food waste, people miss the waste hierarchy is something that I definitely tell people about a lot because those upstream solutions, like Rebecca mentioned at the very beginning, are so important. And that prevention piece and reduction and repair and reduce piece are often overlooked strategies. They sometimes they can be tougher because it means that you have to build out those networks and understand what the local resources are. But yes, but I think there's a lot of opportunity to grow those upstream solutions.
Thank you so much. Do we have any questions from anybody in the Zoom?
Hi, my name is Sudha Krishnasamy, and I've been following Sustainable Pittsburgh and PRC since the days of 2010, I believe. I've had a company called Leaf to Go before this. And right now, I have a company called Integrate Works. And one of our pillars, thanks to Rebecca and Laura, I think back then we had really nailed down sustainability for a company that I had owned, Leaf to Go. And those practices and examples had indeed led me to develop a software to prevent food waste. And as Rebecca pointed out, some of these waste can be prevented in the procurement stage rather than at the disposal stage. And my question here is, how can we as an IT company partner with or get into some of these coalitions to support your work?
Yeah, either one of you can go ahead.
I have one suggestion. You said it was so one, thank you for being here and for kind of being involved in these organizations. So one way as an IT department, if I understand your question correctly, that you can kind of get involved in, especially in the procurement department, is so there's the Pitt University campus has a surplus IT and all kinds of equipment. So try to look for kind of repurposed, or if you can, and equipment and things like that. So look at those kind of reuse if it meets your needs, and or figure out what those needs are that you can communicate to that to places that are kind of a storage house for those things. The other thing is we work with an organization called eLoop that is an e-steward, which means they have to track every downstream company that they work with where they're recycling the pieces and the parts of electronics. So they often will take electronics and they will refurbish them and send them out too. So that's another company to kind of any of the companies that are E-Loop certified, ask them if there's any partnerships for both procuring materials and for recycling the materials when you have to kind of do an upgrade.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you. We have a question in the chat. Are there examples of local governments across the country that are managing their waste well? This person is curious about effective policy.
I did put a link in the chat to our policy and program toolkit because it has several examples from what local communities are doing on food waste reduction. And I want to also highlight again our model municipal policies, because both of those together come up with a lot of different policy and program approaches that involve food waste in particular, but are applicable to waste at large. So for example, our policy and program toolkit suggests implementing pay-as-you-throw, which is volume-based pricing for trash, and which is one option that many communities have implemented, where you actually pay for how much garbage you generate, and you don't pay for garbage that you don't generate, and you don't pay as much for recycling or composting, so that those are incentivized. So that's an example of a type of policy that tends to drive down waste generation in a community. And you'll see examples of that throughout our policy and program toolkit and our municipal model policies.
But maybe from the top of your head, is there any community that you think is really leading the way, maybe even setting the example?
You know, I always try to not say San Francisco, because it's not seen as a model for many different cities, but I'm going to say San Francisco. And the reason that I think San Francisco is a model is not just because San Francisco is groovy. It's because it's operating in a network of state and local policies and programs, including incentives. So the state passed a series of policies, beginning with mandatory recycling for commercial entities, mandatory organics recycling, and moving into SB 1383 to keep organics out of landfills. All of these kinds of policies provide the kind of support at a local level. So it's very hard for a city to do it all on their own. It's not impossible for a city to get really far on its own, but it's very challenging for a city to get as far as they might possibly get on waste reduction without some incentives from the federal and the state governments, without some sort of supportive infrastructure for composting and recycling, et cetera.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Laura, do you know, I guess from a Pennsylvania point of view, like maybe some things that are currently preventing similar initiatives from taking place here?
Man, my colleagues would be able to answer this better, but there's a couple things. One is Act 101, and just the cost of throwing something in the trash is much less. It's very low. So it's easier for people to do. It's easier for people to manage. So that's one thing. Also, we're a net importer of trash, and oftentimes the haulers also own the landfills or some of that infrastructure, which also gives big haulers a lot of power too. So that's also hard to kind of combat, especially if you want to have policies like a bottle bill, where you're trying to actually remove some of the weight, which is how everything gets, which is the cost of everything is a by weight basis. So if you're removing the weight, you're removing some of the money that those companies get. So I think in Pennsylvania is also unique, being a commonwealth where there's a lot of power at the municipal level, which does make things a little bit difficult more regionally. So I also think that if we can have regional solutions where, like for example, that the glass recycling network, where there's a few different municipalities that get together and share costs. Also at the city level, they're also trying to upscale their yard scale composting to make a regional municipal authority. So that's another example of regionalization, so that those costs can be shared. for waste and try to give better incentives. And I think that in combination with Darby, you know, some of the organics bans and things like that, as long as they're paired with good incentives and good education along the way, I think is a good way to get there.
Thank you. Do you have any other questions from the participants in the chat?
I had one typed up, if I could just say it
Sure.
here.
Yeah.
And my question was, is there a movement away from commercial or industrial separators or separation methods towards this grassroots approach that we sort of hear here? But I think you answered it, that the big companies maybe don't have an incentive to do that, right? Is that what you were describing to me? Because I had typed it, but then you answered it. Of course, that's how these kind of things go. But you would think that capturing it at a very large scale would be the way to go, because it's very hard to get me to change my habits in my house. Very hard to change as an organization a lot of times without a lot of thought. And I know that's why we're here, but I am curious. It seems like if you could incentivize the larger companies, you may have a better chance at capturing some of this. But maybe not. I don't know enough about the process. I'm just curious what your thoughts are.
Yeah, there is some of that. So, a great example of that would be, like I mentioned, extended producer responsibility. And sometimes in those policies, they will give a set point. So they'll say that at least 20% of the of the packaging that you create has to be recyclable. And a lot of those haulers, and yes, those big haulers and those big entities love extended producer responsibility, because that is a guaranteed input, right? That's a guaranteed amount that they need to recycle. So that's one incentive that kind of works for the big haulers. The big haulers are also able to put in more technology, for instance, like sorting equipment. So a lot of plastic sorting is done through infrared and AI. So AI is another thing that's really enhancing their ability to sort through different materials and get better at that. There's also, yeah, for some things though, there is a push to separate instead of having everything in a single stream bin. In order to separate things out, especially glass, because glass tends to be more, it can contaminate other forms of recycling. So that's another piece that may be helpful if the bigger companies can kind of get on board with some of that too. I don't know. Does that answer your question, James?
From a different angle I hadn't considered, but it is helpful. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. We had a question in the chat. Somebody asked, how can an organization join the Zero Food Waste Coalition? And Darby provided the link, and we'll also send it out in a follow-up email, but it's zerofoodwastecoalition.org. Any other questions? We have time for a couple more questions.
I do have one additional question, if I'm not holding anything up. And that's that I know that one issue we have is we tend to have events, catered events here that we hold here at the hall. And then what happens is they happen on a Friday, and the window of time for where we could donate food starts to shrink, right? Because most of ours is on the other end, not on the front side. And so we work with individual providers, Shepherd's Hort, we worked with a lot of times because I'm at the memorial. But if they can't get here on Monday morning, let's say afterwards, our window is closed for what to do with that food. And then we start the search for finding another group to do it for the next time or to have backups. Is there a more central agency that would be willing to receive this food, or a resource where, hey, and rather than us trying to pick individuals where we could send this food to, a more central one that would distribute it if it's needed someplace versus it just going into the garbage?
I think that's probably a specific question to where you're located, but in general, there are some cities that are deploying software. Carrot, CAREIT is an example of one of those types of software where people can upload what they've got to donate, and someone could go onto the board and see what's available and grab it. And another thing some cities are doing is creating hubs where they have refrigeration hubs and transportation hubs where you can transport it to a rescue hub. And then if it's gonna have to sit over the weekend, it's sitting in the refrigerator, so it's gonna be suitable for donation. So that's something to explore. But I think that's something that often cities take on or food rescue organizations take on. But hearing from donors that they might be interested in that sort of thing might spur that kind of activity.
Yeah, and also to follow that up, I see someone had mentioned also the food bank. So that's one option you could look into, the Greater Pittsburgh Community Food Bank. There's also 412 Food Rescue, if you've connected with them at all. They're local here, and you're with Soldiers and Sailors, is that right?
That's right, but I don't actually oversee this, but I hear it, in
Oh,
meetings that this
okay.
is something that comes up. So I'm asking
Yeah.
it now and I will pass everything. I'll write it down and I'll make sure it gets to the right people.
Yeah, check out the food bank and 412 Food Rescue. They can
Thank you.
definitely help out with that.
And we have one more question in the chat. Do you have suggestions for where to bring large quantities of soft plastic recycling, such as a pickup truck load of 1 to 2 times a month maximum?
Yes, it depends. Well, Michael Brothers, will take plastics with a resin code 1 through 7. They are connected with a local company called Hydroblocks that melts that down. So they are one place that you can take them if it's usually Pittsburgh will take number ones and number twos and some number 5s. So, and then there is Reimagine Recycling, which will take number 5s and melt them down. So there's those kind of resources. And what I will do is I will put a link to the recycling resources in the chat, and that'll kind of help to answer some of those questions too, I think. It's a long link, but
Thank you.
yeah.
So at this time, we will close the Q&A discussion. And we are now going to move into our breakout discussions. Thank you to everyone who has joined us for the presentation. For those who are participating live, we'll now move into the facilitated breakout discussions where you'll have the opportunity to discuss practical ideas related to food and beverage hospitality, retail offices, workplaces, and communities, institutions, and the public sector.